Good afternoon. I'm John Bonner, Executive Vice President of CAST, and we're awfully happy to have a paper here today with Dr. Gale Buchanan to do the presentation. Before we give his presentation, though, I want to give just a little background to CAST that I think may be of use to you as you think about how we attack from both sides, the science and the emotion. CAST has been around about 40 years. Our mission is to assemble, interpret, and communicate credible science-based information to legislators, regulators, policymakers, the media, and the public. We have had this example shown to us in the sense when we came out with a paper on safety of meat, milk, and eggs from animals fed biotech-derived crops. An AP reporter picked up on it, called me, talked about it, and changed our title when it was printed across a number of public magazines and newspapers around the world, and it was safety of meat, milk, and eggs from animals fed biotech crops shown to be safe. So she changed it and put the to be safe right on there, and there was actually an activist in the article who was put in a much lower light from the way she handled that. So CAST is here to do that. We're a nonprofit organization. We have support of many of you. We would hope several more of you would be joining us in the future so that we can continue to do this as mergers, acquisitions, downsizes have been a real challenge to us. We use volunteer authors. All of our authors and reviewers are volunteer. It is their paper. It is not a CAST paper in the sense of what's in it. We only edit the grammar and make sure it's in the right format and get it out there. These publications are available free online. The paper you're going to hear from Dr. Buchanan, the first weeks it was up, were being downloaded 1,000 times a week. He's going to have given this 10 times before it's done to various audiences, from the Hill where we had 85 people for an hour to the Ask the Seed Trade meeting. So a broad base of people in this particular paper, and that varies from paper to paper. As we look at the people, you can see the dots around the world where these papers have been viewed, and one of them that I wanted to relate to for just a moment is the comment that was made about Stan Curtis this morning. Stan was a good friend of mine as well, and his most recent paper was March 2009, Scientific Assessment of Welfare of Dry Sows Kept in Individual Accommodations. The authors here were from, ironically, Denmark, Texas, Illinois, Ireland, so a broad base of people writing this publication, and not quite what people believe on housing situation either. It's available to you, free download off the website. That was Stan's last contribution to CAST. Also, he did one on the well-being of animal agriculture, a task force report, and that one was back in '97 where he was the lead author on that. He was also the winner of the, what used to be the Black Award is now the Borlaug CAST Communication Award. This is on our website and you can see the information. We are sponsoring with Crop Life this award to encourage people to communicate credible agriculture. It will be, this new award was designed by Jerry Palin, an internationally known Western artist, and is an excellent piece. That piece will be offered this year for the first time. We also have Friday notes that every member of CAST gets that hits on food, on animals, on plants, and an overview of what went on in Washington this week. That goes to any member of CAST. And we are working on one other area besides our blogs and our school tubes, and I would mention these papers. Two of them have been turned into videos now that are on SchoolTube, which may be a new term to many of you, and YouTube for trying to reach children, trying to reach the general public. One on food safety and another one on water have been put on SchoolTube and YouTube. We're also doing one additional thing that we'd ask for your support in attendance or in financial support, and we do need your financial support. It's on the back of this piece. It's in your packet. It's about sustaining animal agriculture. It's a 2-day free symposium being held in conjunction with USDA at the Jefferson Auditorium, and we would hope you would go to the website, look at the agenda, and hopefully attend that. So you've got the information in the right-hand pocket of your folder on the back of the piece with Dr. Buchanan's picture of it. Whoops, one too many. With that, Dr. Buchanan.
Well, thank you, John. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon. And being a plant scientist, it's a special pleasure to be with a lot of animal scientists, although we do have a lot in common. Certainly, the topic is a little bit different than the other topics we've heard today. It's been a great program. I've really enjoyed it. But we're going to be talking about agricultural productivity from the total perspective, and certainly animal agriculture is an integral part of that. Well, I was honored to be the chair of a writing team that included 2 agricultural economists, and so I was outnumbered to start with, but we had a very good writing team that included Luther Tweeton from The Ohio State University and Bob Hurt, formerly with the Rockefeller Foundation and now is at Cornell University. The preface was written by Dr. Norman Borlaug, and I'll say more about Dr. Borlaug later. We had 3 very able reviewers: Chuck Connor, former Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Charles Hess, who is a former Assistant Secretary in the Department and most recently at the University of California, Davis, and Penstrip Anderson, who is an economist at Cornell University. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Borlaug. He was truly a John, especially to those of us engaged in various aspects of agriculture. He's been recognized in many ways, including the Nobel Peace Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, as well as the Congressional Gold Medal. But his greatest contribution was his vision for agriculture and his commitment to ensuring food security for the people on this planet. Well, this paper, as John pointed out, has been downloaded quite a number of times by over 125 countries around the world, so there is a lot of interest in future agricultural productivity. And the comments I'm going to make, I emphasize, are just kind of a very brief overview, and I hope you'll download the paper. It's free, and read the paper in total, because it really covers a lot more than I can just give you in a short, brief presentation. We don't address a lot of issues you might think is important in agricultural productivity. In fact, we started out with a working title of agricultural policy, but we changed that very quickly because we don't address such things as food safety, international trade barriers, farm prices, income support, all of these kind of things which are very, very important to agricultural productivity. But we don't address any of those. Rather, we focus on the basic need for developing information, knowledge, and technology which will enable us to make sound decisions regarding agricultural productivity in the future. For example, correcting the pathologies in the broader U.S. economy can reinforce the ability of agriculture to enhance agricultural productivity as well as increase exports from this country. This includes such things as living beyond our means, importing more than we export, borrowing more than we lend, spending more than we earn, and consuming more than we produce. But given the finite nature of agricultural productive resources such as water, land, plant nutrients, and those kind of things, it's very important to realize that future success of agriculture will be dependent and achieved only through increased and enhanced agricultural productivity. And that's a very important point. Well, what are the drivers for global demand for agricultural output? You could probably guess these as good as I can. Certainly a growing population. The demographers tell us that we can expect about 9 billion of us on this planet by the mid part of the century, and that's a conservative estimate. But there's also another thing. The increased expectations for everybody that's already here. There's not a person in the world that doesn't want to have a better standard of living. Even those of us in this country would like to see better things, more diversity of food, more food, all kinds of things. But there's also some other things as well. As the economy of the world continues to prosper, and I hope and pray that it will, one of the first things that people want as we have more disposable income is what? More and better food, personal transportation, all of these things. But really the big thing that's going to change agricultural productivity demands in the future is that agricultural output can be one of the ways we address the energy challenge facing this planet. And that's one that's really a game changer any way you look at it. There's also another thing that's important. There's 1 billion people in the world today that do not get enough nutrients. They don't get enough calories. They don't get enough food. They're hungry. There's another 1 billion that don't get enough of the nutrients, of the proteins, and the other things that really make for a healthy diet. But based on median population growth, and this is not the high expectation or the low expectations, but what's really thought to be a median expectation population growth, the demand for output in 2025 will be 143% of 2000 output. And the year 2050 is going to be 179%, almost doubling of the required output of the year 2000 by 2050. As I pointed out, one of the real drivers of this whole thing is the potential for agricultural output to be used as part of the energy solution. And certainly that's going to be calling for a new paradigm. And while we're not about to run out of oil, I think we certainly have reached the end of the cheap era of oil. I don't think we're ever going to see oil back down at $10 a barrel again. And I think most of you would agree with that. And that's certainly going to affect agricultural output demands in the years ahead. But harvesting the sun's energy through agriculture will be certainly one of those approaches, and this will bring about a totally new paradigm for agriculture in the future. While agriculture is facing many challenges, there's a number of current and emerging constraints on agricultural productivity. And Lord knows we've heard about some of those constraints today, because the whole program today has been on the constraints of animal agriculture. But here's just a few of the ones, and this covers the waterfront. For example, soil erosion caused by wind, water, and other factors is certainly one of the constraints that we can see and already are seeing throughout the world. Some parts of the world more problem than others. Also, the fact of water is going to be a future serious constraint on agricultural productivity throughout much of the world. Another one you don't think too much about is the lack of support for bioengineered plants and crops. This is one that concerns me deeply, because this is at the heart of plant agriculture, and I'll say more about this from animals in a few minutes. But certainly, this is a very important constraint. But I want to spend a little bit of time, more than usual, on the constraints I see from animal agriculture. Protein from meat and other animal products comprise a very important part of the diet of most humans on this planet. However, and I was really worried when we wrote this, because I thought I might be overstepping and saying it a little bit too harshly, but after the comments today, I don't think I'm going to say it too harshly. However, in Europe and the U.S. and some other parts of the world, there's strong voices that totally oppose animal agriculture. This is a deep concern and certainly a constraint on agricultural productivity in the future. Most of us see this as a major challenge that we have to deal with in the days ahead. This is the challenge we must project and communicate a credible and transparent message that assures and accepts accountability. Personally, it doesn't bother me if someone prefers not to consume animal products. I can't imagine that, but it doesn't bother me if someone doesn't want to eat animal products. That should be a personal preference, as it is. However, those of us that's concerned about agricultural productivity in the future are deeply concerned, because any time you put constraints on agricultural production, that certainly limits the option as to how we're going to feed all of the people on this planet in the years ahead, particularly as we project out to the mid part of this century. Quite frankly, there's a struggle for who determines what we eat. If you ever stop to think about that, is it going to be the producer? I doubt it. I don't think the producer is going to determine what we eat. I think it's going to be determined by various organizations that have an agenda. This includes the vegans, of course, the folks that push Meatless Monday or Meatless Tuesday, folks that promote organic days and those kind of things. Then what about those of us in agriculture that promotes our product over our neighbor's product? We in agriculture fuss a lot with each other, and that certainly is going to affect. But in the final analysis, the consumer should be the one that determines what he or she eats. But the decision should be made by that consumer based on informed knowledge and not on an emotional basis. As a plant scientist, I'm reminded of the opening scene of Dancing with Wolves. Remember when Noel Coster is riding through and the folks on both sides shooting at him in the middle? This kind of reminds me of what we've got going with animal agriculture. Seems like everybody's shooting at us. and we don't have a safe place to go. It's important that we find common ground, and we've heard that repeatedly, that we can't expect that to carry the day, but it certainly is important that we work towards finding a reasonable and successful way to deal with these kind of issues. I think we have to meet the challenges in some way and find a way that will ensure that animal agriculture will remain a viable part of our future agricultural productivity. Animal confinement has led to the development of EPA regulations on concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, as we all know about. But these regulations can certainly increase capital requirements and costs in almost every animal enterprise that you can think of. We saw a list of those this morning, and I can tell you every one of those ideas that have been passed by some legislative body is going to cost in the production of animals. And we saw some of the hidden reasons why to make animal agricultural products more expensive and to try to put us out of business. We recognize that animal agriculture will change due to many economic and social reasons, and that's just going to happen because times do change. But certainly regulations, certifications, local ordinances, propositions, all of these things will have an impact on animal agriculture in the future. State and local regulations stemming from animal welfare concerns simply end up making the product cost more and making it not as viable as it could be. If costs increase too much, livestock production would shift to jurisdictions without such stringent regulations or perhaps even out of the country. Federal regulation may drive production overseas, and state regulations may drive production to other parts of the country that have more viable and reasonable welfare standards, and I think we all know that. When markets do not alone provide desirable levels of environmental protection, animal welfare, a public role, may be important. The usual avenue for public policy is through state or national legislative bodies, representative legislative bodies. Some alternative agricultural advocates are increasingly trying to turn such environmental issues to direct vote of the people rather than to representative democracy. And I don't have to tell you that unless the public is educated and understand all aspects of issues, the unintended consequences that can result from plebiscite democracy is a real concern to me, because I can tell you, you get the public from an emotional basis that are not thinking on a rational basis, and you can get all kind of undesirable consequences. For example, requirements for costly facilities and equipment mandated by the U.S. poultry and livestock producers can certainly drive production elsewhere, as I pointed out earlier. And one of the examples we point out in the paper is the California Proposition 2, which means that in 2015 it shall be a misdemeanor for any person to confine a pregnant pig, a calf raised for veal, or a chicken that lays eggs to not allow room for that animal to stand up freely, lie down, turn around, and flap their wings and all that sort of thing. That means that with a normal hen that's got a wingspan of 3 feet, they got to have 9 square feet, which is substantially more space than they normally have. Now, what's that going to cost? If you increase the housing requirement by tenfold, you can put the math to it and see that it's going to cost more. Certainly, we recognize some of the challenges in animal agriculture. In this chart, we see a few of those challenges that we face. There are some bright spots. For example, recent research into controlling climate emissions indicate that feed additives can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's something that's very significant. Developing a better understanding of the advantages and the disadvantages of various types of confinement, including free range, is another important area that we have to balance the welfare of the animal, and that's something we're all concerned about with the productivity and that sort of thing. Some other challenges include developing better animal health products, food security such as decreasing microbial risk, and the use of antibiotics. And we heard a beautiful presentation just prior to my presentation, and obviously a lot of interest in antibiotics, and this is something that's very important, but they're challenged in every way to Sunday, very serious challenges. We must document and communicate the value and safety of these compounds to our health, the animal's health, our food supply, and our safety. At the same time, we must seek alternatives that will ensure the continued health of our animals and ensure that we have these products for the future, because they're a very important part of our productivity. Also, much research should be focused on more effectively converting animal matures, I'm not going to say waste, into some form of energy, because that gives you a benefit on both directions. So that's another real challenge. But most importantly, an important challenge is to find a way to enable the public to have a better understanding and appreciation of animal welfare and animal productivity, because that, in the final analysis, is the challenge we have. And this is why I spend some of my time in retirement and working for CAST, because that's the goal that we have at CAST, is trying to develop that understanding across all the disciplines that's involved in agriculture. Because of the importance of animal agriculture in achieving secure food future for the people of this planet, CAST has a long history of really addressing many of the important topics involved in animal agriculture. Well, let me continue with some of the other constraints. We got enough for animals right there, but we have a lot of other constraints. The Endangered Species Act is one. Preserving the planet's diversity in flora and fauna is a very important thing that all of us can agree with. No one would like to see us lose species. That's a given. But we need to understand that preserving the species of some diverse plants comes at a price, and that's important. And I think we have to make decisions after we carefully weigh what is the cost versus the benefit of preserving some species of organisms. And being an old agronomist, I can't help but be concerned about, when you talk about sustainability in the future, about fertilizer nutrients. Among the principal fertilizer resources, the most important one that comes to mind first is nitrogen, and that's important in animal agriculture because you've got to grow something for cows to eat. Nitrogen is plentiful, 78%, but most plants can't use nitrogen. Only legumes can use nitrogen. And the way that the plants can use nitrogen is if you convert it into a form they can use, and most of that is done through the utilization of a finite resource, natural gas. So that gets right back to the challenge we have there. Potassium resources are pretty abundant throughout the world, but phosphorus is another story. We don't have a lot of phosphorus. In fact, the United States only has about a 100-year supply of phosphorus. Then we got to start worrying about it. Now, we do have a lot of phosphorus in other parts of the world, but that is another thing that's a real challenge. Global warming is another issue we have facing us. And while agricultural output and cropland may not be affected materially, it's certainly going to change a lot of things. For example, where we grow crops, the crops we grow, the general agreement on how plants use water. There's going to be too much water in some places, not enough water in other places. So global climate change, regardless of what causes it, is going to impact on agricultural productivity in the future. Another point that I'd like to make is there's a number of major issues facing agricultural productivity in other parts of the world. There's a few countries that are really important in this agricultural productivity issue. China and India are two that come to mind because those are already major population centers, and those are going to continue to be major population centers in the future. You know, a few years ago we were concerned about, with the population of China, they were going to be not able to feed themselves. But look what happened in the last 20 years. China has committed to agricultural research that they are net exporter of a number of agricultural products, and, as well as feeding themselves. And of course, India is the same way, but not quite as robust as China, but still these are major population centers. Another major part of the world that's of great concern is Brazil. And that is probably the largest country on the planet that still has, as yet, untapped potential for agricultural productivity. So they're going to be a center, even more of a center of agricultural productivity in the future than perhaps any other country on the planet. And finally, sub-Saharan Africa. And that's one that concerns me because that's the part of the world where so many of the people live close to the hunger edge all the time. And they're investing such a meager amount of their resources into enhancing the agricultural productivity, they're going to be wards of the planet for a long time unless they change. But these are three countries that really concern me deeply about the future of agricultural productivity. Well, what are some of the strategies to meet the challenge? Well, I can tell you that it's important that we keep in mind the role that institutions and infrastructure has in agricultural productivity. We're blessed in this country because we've developed the infrastructure. But most of this has got to come from the public sector. The private sector is very, very important because they make a major important contribution in so many areas. But so much of the infrastructure and institutions that support agricultural productivity are either federal or our states. And this is going to be important in the future. How should we help less developed countries, those countries that really need help? And this is another topic that deeply concerns me. And that is, we're going to have to continue to providing food to countries that's really in need. For example, when they had the earthquake in Haiti, we have made our country proud by the support we've provided. And we do that to literally all countries around the world that are really in need. We do open our hearts. But we've got to do more than that. We've got to find a way to enable those countries to become self-sufficient. Haiti just didn't get into trouble with the earthquake. They were in trouble before that. In all countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, we need to help them build infrastructure so they can feed themselves. You know, it's a little bit like the story of the fish. You know, if you give a person a fish, they get their belly full for one meal. If you teach them to fish, they can stay full until they catch all the fish in the pond. But if you teach them to grow fish, they can be fixed for life. And that's in essence what we have to do with all of these countries around the world, is help them develop the infrastructure so they can produce their own food or find a way to trade. Well, this brings us to the critical point of what do we do about the next green revolution? Well, first, if we're going to have another green revolution, all nations have got to have a major commitment to science. Dr. Borlaug clearly understood that science was a necessary and key part of the agricultural policy to alleviate hunger around the world. That's why in his last writings he called for a second green revolution. The critical question for us today is, how do we go about creating that second green revolution? Certainly in the first green revolution, classical genetics played a key role, but in future revolutions it's going to take biotechnology, genetically modified organisms, and all of the modern elements of science. The following examples are just a few of the things that I think are going to be the types of breakthroughs that really enable a second green revolution. This includes converting or enabling C3 plants to utilize the C4 photosynthetic pathway. The paper will give you descriptions of all of these if you are so interested. Developing nitrogen fixation in grasses or non-legumes. That's another major breakthrough that we need. Incorporating the process of apomixis into crop plants. Improving pest resistance, such as the Bt gene has done such wonders for the corn rootworm and some of those types of critters. Improve the energy efficiency as well as the nutrient and other types of efficiency of plants. You know, plants only have about 1% efficiency in converting sunlight into chemical energy. So improving the efficiency of plants themselves is a very important challenge. Effectively and efficiently capturing animal waste is an area in the animal area that's really important. Eliminating all respiratory diseases of livestock is really one that I think that would have a major breakthrough enabling a second green revolution. And then the one that I think is really important, comparable to some in the plant, is utilizing the power of genomics and biotechnology to improve food animals. And this one is the sky. If you could develop some of those things, we could do a lot to make headway that I think would enable us to do that. But then the question comes up, what is the commitment to agricultural research to bring about a second green revolution? We authors agreed that this would be something we'd like to say that the research was there and we are making the commitment to do that. Sadly, that's not the case. We just don't see it. There's an abundance of professional agricultural economics literature that clearly shows a strong association between agricultural productivity and funding and support for agricultural research. And I don't think anybody can argue with that. In fact, if somebody wants to argue with it, I'd be glad to take the time to argue with you. But given the unarguable linkage between research and agricultural productivity, I think we have to strengthen our support for agricultural research, not only in this country, but indeed in every country around the world, particularly in some of those countries such as in sub-Saharan Africa, which is investing almost nothing in agricultural research and their future well-being. Well, in conclusion, there's a lot of factors that's coming together to create the perfect storm in terms of global food needs or agricultural output and the expectations for that output. While population growth rates are falling in some countries, it's still increasing in other countries, such that we're going to reach that 9 billion by 2050, according to the demographers. And in addition to increasing demands for food and energy in developing countries, we're certainly increasing our own demand and expectations, but there's other things. We're also looking at the challenges of ecosystem services, such as protecting the endangered species. We're also looking at other environmental concerns, and don't forget energy. That's a big one. That's the elephant in the room that's not going to go away. Well, responding to these needs is not the sole responsibility of the President, believe it or not, and I'm sure that the President would be glad to hear that. It's not only the responsibility of Congress. It's not the responsibility only of state legislatures, but the whole public at large has a key responsibility in helping to meet this challenge. The public will have to actively support political action, particularly on such broad issues as global climate change, welfare of animals, natural resource utilization, investments in agriculture, research, and education, and the public has a key role in all of these. We've heard that many times today, and I guess we will chastise just a little bit by not doing enough in that area to help ourselves, and that's one of the things I think we need to be concerned about. Is what can we do to help the public better understand that their future is dependent upon information, knowledge, and technology gained through research. I read an editorial by Bill Gates and the former CEO of DuPont about what we're investing in health research and other areas. And they didn't even mention agricultural research. They talked about science research, but they didn't even mention agricultural research. And I wanted to write to him, but I don't think I better write to Mr. Gates. But anyway, this really concerns me. Well, finally, if we're going to address these pictures in the days ahead, it's going to take a strong commitment on the part of the public, but those of us directly engaged in agriculture have a key responsibility to play in that. I think it's going to take a constant public commitment to seek the funding to ensure that we have the resources to address these challenges we face. We are hopeful, and I'm speaking for all of the authors, are hopeful and confident that we will find the resources to make such a commitment. Indeed, if we want to have a survival on this planet in the days ahead, we have no alternative. Thank you very much.